as well. So we're just going to get going for the 16th annual State of the Net conference, which is pretty remarkable, given this conference has been going on for 16 years. Adam Thayer made a great post the other day on Twitter about how long this thing has been going on. And the purpose of this organization and this conference was a meeting place for internet stakeholders. There is no internet industry, and that was really profound at the beginning when we started doing this, that there was no internet industry in the city back in 1996, 1997. There was really just a bunch of public interest advocates, a bunch of civil libertarians, a bunch of freedom of expression folks, a few companies like AOL and UUNet and Netcom were like the big players. So there really wasn't an industry. There really wasn't an industry like an established, but all stakeholders that cared about the internet to convene. And that's really the purpose for this organization and this conference. We don't take any positions on legislation or regulation, but we try to curate really important conversations. The theme for this year is a new decade for internet policy. That maybe seemed like a throwaway line to folks, but we really mean it. And we also were able to bring in the foremost internet archivist in the world, Brewster Kahle, for our luncheon keynote. And so we started thinking about what the last decade meant. Starting in 2010 was essentially the decade of growth of all of social media, all of video streaming. The internet as we know it today has grown profoundly over the past 10 years. And so we wanted to some of the panels today will want to take stock of the last 10 years, but also look ahead to what the next 10 years will bring. A few housekeeping notes. The hashtag on Twitter for today is SOTN 2020. We are at SOTN is our Twitter handle. The Wi-Fi password, I made a few mistakes on the Wi-Fi password, but it's convene, and the password is stay connected, all lowercase. So I apologize if I made a typo here or there. The password is stay connected, lowercase. We will have breakouts in all the rooms back here, the East Hub and the West Hub, and we'll also have a breakout here after the morning keynotes. I think as far as this space is incredibly crazy, I would not have thought I'd be standing up here in 2020 when vinyl sales have passed digital CDs. It seems kind of inverted to me. And also the hyperbole of the internet is remarkable too, in the sense that recently a CEO said that artificial intelligence will be more significant than fire, which I think is maybe a little overstating the case. But it just shows you kind of the polar ends of how people feel about these issues. As far as keynotes today, we have a whole series of morning keynotes followed by some breakouts, including privacy, will be in this room. And today is Data Privacy Day, World Data Privacy Day. So you'll also see a healthy dose of privacy conversations today for State of the Net, because it is Data Privacy Day. And the hashtag for that is privacy aware, I believe. So if you want to contribute to that conversation. Our first keynote this morning is Congressman Will Hurd. He is from the 23rd District of Texas. Immediately when he came into Congress as a freshman, he had assumed a committee leadership position on the Intelligence Committee. He's now ranking member on the Intelligence Modernization and Readiness Subcommittee. He is an enthusiastic supporter of the Congressional App Challenge for his constituents in the 23rd District of Texas. It may have something to do with the fact that he was a computer science major at Texas A&M, a former CIA official. He is one of my favorite members of Congress, and welcome today to State of the Net, Congressman Will Hurd.
Good. Well, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure being with all of y'all, and to start off an important conversation. I've told this story before, but a month after I was born in August of 1977. NASA put Voyager 1 into space, and when the engineers and scientists developed Voyager 1, they thought it was going to last for 4 or 5 years. It's still reporting back today. It was the first man-made object to go into interstellar space. Right, well, a lot of what we learned about our universe, we learned from Voyager 1. When I was in school, Pluto was a planet. Now it's not a planet, but I think Pluto's a planet again. So I'm pro Pluto being a planet. And do you know what the onboard memory of Voyager 1 was? 40 kilobytes. That's crazy, right? That's a Word document. The pictures y'all are going to take today wouldn't even fit on Voyager 1. That was 42 years ago, right? What's the next 42 years is going to make the technological change we've seen in the last 42 years look insignificant. And, you know, as a computer science major, if any of y'all have Fortran 77 problems, let me know. And that's my expertise. You know, learning computer science in the late 90s, I never would have anticipated the rapid advancements that we've seen in internet and in information technology. And as I said, and I can't say this enough, the technological change we're going to see in the next 30 years is going to make the last 30 years look insignificant. And American dominance in advanced technology is not guaranteed. We must maintain American leadership in next generation technology because it's been an essential part of our nation's political and economic power since the Second World War. And unfortunately, we've entered an age where U.S. military and economic dominance is no longer guaranteed. In this new age, a leadership in advanced technology will determine who sets the rules of the road in the global economy and the international system that we live in. And if America loses its advantage in technology, it will have a devastating effect on our economy and national security. We can't let this happen. That's why I'm glad there's folks like y'all that care about this. And technology in the wrong hands also threatens our values and the very underpinnings of our free society. China is not using facial recognition to make it easier to buy groceries with your face. They are using it to continue to oppress their citizens. Right now in Xinjiang province, the Chinese government has erected a technological surveillance state that has brought Orwell's 1984 into the 21st century. Hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs are being tracked daily for potential disloyalty, and more than 1 million have been arbitrarily detained in concentration camps. The silence in the West about China's use of technology to oppress an entire ethnic group only serves the interests of the Communist Party, and it also ignores, this technology is going to be used to export to the other parts of China, and then they're going to use it to export it to autocratic regimes. So this is something that China is interested in doing, and nations choosing to invest in advanced technology now are deciding the norms for the rest of the world, and it's going to be with or without us. And a number of ethical dilemmas are going to arise, and the answers are not clearly defined. Should an algorithm decide how long someone is sentenced to prison or whether or not he or she gets bail? Can a machine kill another machine? Can a machine kill a human without a human making that decision? Should we abdicate leadership in this arena? If we do, then we leave a vacuum for authoritarian countries to put their spin on global warfare, privacy, and bias standards, a possibility that threatens the openness that has made the internet a force for freedom and prosperity around the world. China's going to always have more data than we do. Thinking that we're going to be able to beat them at that game is foolhardy, in my opinion. So we have to be developing algorithms that take less data to run it, because the Chinese don't care about privacy, they don't care about civil liberties, and they have more of it. And these are some of the difficult challenges that we're going to have to face in now and the coming months. And China has been clear about its intentions. In 2015, it released their Made in China plan. And that plan, they state that by the year 2049, that's when China celebrates 100 years of communist rule in the mainland, that they want to be the leader in advanced technology and manufacturing. So we know what they want to do, so we have to ensure that we lead in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and other technology that are going to define this century. And that's why the government should work towards things like a national strategy to coordinate across the government, across academia, across the private sector, in order to develop a plan on how to adopt an AI across sectors. Creating a national strategy will better prioritize limited government resources and more rapidly advance American AI technology. And this is one reason why I've partnered with my friend, I would call him my partner in crime, Robin Kelly from Illinois. And then we're working with the Bipartisan Policy Center to develop an AI strategy that Congress can pass and get behind, and the goal is to get that done this year. This will include several key priorities. First, we have to dramatically increase the resources devoted to research and development. The government should set an example and lead the way in adopting AI, which is going to save taxpayer dollars and make government more efficient. Additionally, we have to address the ethical questions raised by AI systems across different fields. And this is something that I actually think Congress is well positioned to play a leading role in shaping. Federal standards and regulation can't get in the way of AI innovation. And instead, regulation should focus on addressing ethical, security, and privacy concerns that are not covered by existing frameworks. And guess what? In AI, we already have rules against bias. We already have rules against discrimination. And those algorithms should follow those rules that are already on the book. It's actually not that hard. That's up to the developers to figure out how to ensure that gets implemented. And finally, these efforts in developing a national strategy on AI should advance emerging technologies. We can't advance those emerging technologies if we don't have enough qualified professionals to stay competitive in the new economy. We have to develop a workforce of the future that can tackle these new collar jobs. And the crux of the problem is this. We have to prepare our workforce for disruptions not seen since the Industrial Revolution, and we must train our kids for 21st century jobs that don't exist today. And to meet this challenge, we're going to have to mobilize educational, government, and private sector resources at every level, and from national programs to community colleges to elementary schools. And for the current workforce, reskilling and continuous education and workforce development will be key to adapting our economy to these changes. Researchers in fields like AI are in high demand. We all know that. Seven-figure salaries around the globe. But right now, we don't have enough computer scientists or skilled technicians to compete in this global economy. Give you some stats. In Texas alone, 38,000 open computing jobs. And the average salary was about $93,000, which is double the state average. I always tell parents in my district, make sure your kids learn computer science. And unfortunately, with those number of positions just in Texas, our educational system is not meeting that demand. In 2017, the last time we have reliable data, Texas universities only graduated 3,500 computer scientists. And of that, only 19% were female. Those are terrible numbers. And these educational efforts will also require a broader computer science pipeline that focus on fundamental skills to master AI and these new careers. And the fundamental issue there is coding. Coding is the language of the future, and if our students can't speak it, they're going to be left behind. And the only way we ensure that qualified talent pipeline is we have to introduce coding earlier in our educational system. We have to start in middle school. I can make an argument that we should be starting in elementary school. And another thing we should be doing is working to streamline legal immigration so that America continues to be the beneficiary of the brain drain from other parts of the world. There are 1 million international students studying in the United States, including about 360,000 from China. The best and brightest from around the world are being educated right here, and we need an education system that allows them to stay here, particularly in STEM fields. And look, real simple for me, if China wants to steal our secrets and continue to steal our IP, we should be stealing their engineers and scientists. And the bottom line is, if we want to survive and thrive in this technological age, we need to place computer science at the top of our priority list when it comes to education. And the only way we can pull this off is if we actually work together, and this is something that we've seen work down in the 23rd District of Texas. These advances in technology are creating new security risks that are affecting our lives. The benefits are clear, but for millions of Americans, one of these threats from new technology is robocalls and phone scams. It's insane. I don't know about y'all, but when my phone rings multiple times a day and I hear about, hi, I'm calling about your student loans, right? My blood pressure goes up. And here are some crazy stats. 50% of all the calls made to cell phones are spam calls. and Americans receive over 1.3 million spam calls on a weekly basis. But these calls are more than just a nuisance. The scams they perpetuate have cost Americans millions of dollars. In 2018 alone, 25 million Americans reported fraud as a result of robocalls. That's why I'm proud that just before the holidays, we in Congress passed in an overwhelmingly bipartisan bill. Now, you don't hear about this in the news much. Nobody ever clicks on an article that said Congress worked, right? But we passed a bipartisan bill that deterred criminal, unsolicited robocall scams, and it gave federal officials more tools to find scammers, increase penalties for those who are caught, and promote the use of caller identification to identify and stop robocalls. It's called the Traced Act, and it was a great step in the right direction, but we have to remain vigilant because just as hackers are developing new methods of attack, once a patch has been made, the tactics and techniques utilized by these robocallers are going to continue to evolve. We all are aware of the growing cybersecurity threats facing the government and the private sector. Just like robocallers, cyber criminals are increasingly operating like businesses, using hacking as a tool for profit. A recent study by Verizon estimates that 71% of breaches were financially motivated. And chillingly, cyber criminals are sharing their data, their tools, their expertise to advance their operations as fast as the marketplace allows. The news is full of debilitating hacks against banks, major corporations, and even the U.S. government. Everybody in the country now knows what OPM stands for, right? We know that. Equifax, none of y'all gave Equifax your information. Target and Marriott, I'm a Bonvoy member, so that one was a little too close to home. But these hacks compromise the personal data of millions of people. And while network technology is making our life easier, this is also increasing our surface area of attack. Again, the numbers speak for themselves. Last year, 140 million spam emails were sent. That's every day. And that's 55% of all the global email traffic. 400,000 new forms of malware are unleashed daily, on top of the more than 600 million that already exists. And an average large U.S. corporation experienced 54 million security events just a couple of years ago. And the average time to identify a breach, and this is according to last year, it's 206 days. That's a terrible stat. And rapid advances in IoT will only increase our vulnerability to attacks. And by the end of this year, it's estimated that about 20 billion IoT devices will be connected to the internet. And many of those already have security vulnerabilities are putting on large networks. Many of these devices are shipped with factory-set hard-coded passwords. This represents a weak point that leaves the rest of the network vulnerable to an attack. IoT devices have been used by bad actors to launch devastating attacks against websites, hosting service ISPs, and given the challenges every day that the federal government faces with cybersecurity, I'm particularly concerned with the threat that IoT devices are going to introduce to our network. That's why I work with Robin, Senators Warner from Virginia and Senator Gardner from Colorado to introduce an IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act. It's real simple. If you're going to introduce IoT into your device and it has a known vulnerability, you got to have a plan to patch it. Right? This isn't rocket science. This is a simple step to make sure that the government is prepared for the rapid introduction of IoT. The challenge we face is not whether next generation technology will be transformative and disruptive, but how will we manage this oncoming disruption? Will we let it overwhelm an underprepared government and leave the U.S. and our allies unable to keep up with our adversaries? Will we let our society fall behind and fail to harness the possibilities created by advanced technology, foregoing innovation that can improve the lives of tens of millions of people? Or are we going to meet these challenges head on, as we have many times before, and mobilize the resources of our nation, society, and allies to grasp the opportunities before us? We must make sure the United States remains the most important economy and innovation center of the world, And we must make sure that the values of the free world, not autocracies, guide the development of technology. We must take advantage of technology before it takes advantage of us. These are the fundamental challenges we face in the 21st century, and I'm confident we will rise to the occasion. And I just want to thank the Internet Education Foundation for what y'all do with the App Challenge, for bringing these folks together, and for the resources.
All right. Well, I am not going to introduce. Congresswoman McMorris Rodgers, because David just did that. So we're going to just jump right in to this really, I think, interesting conversation.
Are you going to start with the Cosmic Crisp, the greatest invention in apples?
We were just talking about that. If you haven't eaten, I want to eat it. I haven't eaten it yet.
Well, it's on the market now.
Yeah.
Developed at Washington State University.
Absolutely.
And it's just kind of fun that we have a new apple that tastes better than ever and lasts longer than ever. And, it's just another example of American ingenuity.
So there's two apples.
Yes, there's two apples.
It's the other apple. But no, you're right. Actually, that is about innovation, which we lose sight of. That innovation is much bigger than what we're talking about today. Talking about what we're talking about today, E&C is, as everybody knows, is really the hub of where these issues around AI, privacy, 5G, and others are debated and discussed and move forward in Congress. Can you say a little bit more about that, and particularly your role in that process?
Sure. Well, it seems to me that the issues around innovation technology, the issues in front of the Energy and Commerce Committee right now, winning 5G, AI, making sure that America continues to lead in AI, are at the forefront of our economy. Our national security is going to determine whether or not America leads, whether or not America wins, continues in global dominance. So these issues are very important to our future, and I'm excited to be the lead Republican on the Consumer Protection and Commerce Subcommittee, working with Jan Schakowsky as the chair on many of these issues, and really pleased to see the crowd here today.
Great. So let's jump into 5G. We can't talk about this without talking about 5G. We'll probably have to talk about 5G, blockchain, and AI, and other buzzwords, but let's talk about 5G. There's a lot of with 4G, we didn't really talk very much about a race. It was like we were leading 4G. We did all the right things, and we did lead 4G. With 5G, we're obviously talking about a race, particularly with China. And that ends up conflating, I think, two issues. One is just how our network providers, our wireless providers, are going to deploy 5G, and is that going to be faster than China? And the second is network equipment companies, which we don't have any anymore, really. We have Huawei, and then Nokia and Ericsson and Samsung to some extent. What are the implications on the deployment side of what the carriers are doing if we don't adopt it expeditiously?
Right, well, it's a significant impact. And on 4G, we led smartphones and apps, and we saw the millions of jobs, billions of dollars to our GDP. It was significant impact. And clearly, we are in a race with China right now. And as I said, from an economic perspective and also from a national security perspective, I believe it is so important that we are leading and that we're deploying 5G in a way that will ensure that security to our economy as well as our national security. I often like to remind people that in order for America to be a diplomatic power, we have to be a military power. To be a military power, you have to be an economic power. It's all connected. And it seems to me it's all connected around 5G right now. And where we go with 5G is so important. In China, they've taken a very different approach. And that race is clear. And just kind of taking a step back, China has gotten to where they are largely by stealing intellectual property and by state-owned enterprises. And that is the biggest concern with Huawei right now, is that you have a company that is largely going to be more dependent or beholden to the Chinese government. And what does that? And how do we make sure that we have protections in place? And so I believe it is very important that we are moving forward. Some of the challenges that we've had. You know, we don't have the networking capability right now, the gear, and we need to be developing that in America. And I think that is critical to us winning and moving forward.
So just to build on that point a little bit, the interesting history I don't think very many people really understand or remember, but back in 1919, in World War I, the Navy was quite concerned about dependence on foreign wireless providers. Marconi, the Italian, and we were dependent on Marconi International, was an Italian and UK company, and the Navy said that just is unacceptable. The Navy needed its own equipment, so they, through a presidential action, they ended up buying up Marconi patents in the U.S. and creating essentially what was called the Radio Corporation of America, what we know of as RCA, as an independent part of GE. That was pretty kind of clearly directional action by government, but people are talking about similar things today. For example, could we leapfrog and go to 6G? Could we support American companies or American and European partners to do 6G? Or what people now are talking about is software-defined networks, that maybe the Huawei advantage, which the hardware being the core component, maybe we can leapfrog them with the software-defined networks. How do you see all of that, and do you see there's a role for government there?
Well, I largely want to be incentivizing the private sector. I believe that the private sector responds the quickest and can be more innovative. And so my hope is that we can continue to focus on the private sector leading with this technology and getting us to a place where it's not the government. Now, I know that there's a group of senators that have worked on some legislation that is around creating these secure networks. And finding this balance between innovation and security is going to be one of our biggest challenges moving forward.
So one of the things I find a little confusing in the debate is the president has implemented a ban on Chinese equipment in our network providers, and the major telcos have all agreed even without that, they're not going to buy Huawei or ZTE equipment. So should we really be worried about network security once we have that ban in place? There's an issue, obviously, with rural carriers where they might have to do rip and replace, but it seems to me, at least domestically, we should be pretty secure.
Well, I think we're going to have to just be vigilant, and that's going to be ongoing. And you know, there's this concern about developing two networks as such, and the decision that Great Britain is making right now on Huawei is playing into that. But in America, I believe that getting to 5G as soon as possible and releasing the spectrum that is needed is one of the best. You know, we need to move forward as soon as possible. We've done well with the low and the high bands, but that mid band and the disagreements that we've had over the C band, we need to get beyond interagency squabbles and the industry squabbles and get to a place where we can actually move forward, because it is critical to our future. And you mentioned the rural broadband and closing the digital divide. You know, I come from a district in Eastern Washington that this is very, very important. Probably the number one issue in my district right now is closing the digital divide. You get outside of Spokane at all, and people are desperate, and it's mixed as far as what kind of coverage they have, and it's foundational to their economic future. You know, everything is tied to the internet, healthcare, education. So they're saying we just need 1G, right? So we're as a country, we're focusing on 5G, which we need to do, and be vigilant, but we also need to make sure that we're taking action to close the digital divide. And that's where I'm encouraged with Chairman Pai and the continued focus he's bringing to more resources. I'm encouraged that from a congressional perspective, we're looking at the mapping to make sure that we're taking action that is going to ensure no one's left behind.
Maybe one last question on 5G. Are there things the committee can be doing? A lot of this is just simply going to be things that the FCC has to do, or NTIA or others, but Are there things that the committee can do, particularly around oversight and sense of Congress, telling the administration what you think they have to be doing?
Right. Well, I think so far the committee has been focusing more on the mapping issue for the rural broadband in particular, just recognizing that there's more work that needs to be done, but probably oversight would be appropriate too.
Great. So let me switch over to privacy. We now are going to be facing another onslaught of notices around. I love the last onslaught of notices when GDPR went in place that I still suffer from. Yes, I will accept that cookie. I don't know what California is going to bring us. I was reading actually a little piece you had written, or at least came out this morning, Congresswoman, and it was around the issues of having a patchwork of state laws and the problems with that. And you wrote, quote, "A patchwork of state laws would drive up compliance costs, and those costs would be passed on to the consumer." Can you say a little bit more about that? What are the problems if we don't get a national framework that really avoids that?
I come from Washington State. Washington State is in their legislative session, and they're debating a privacy law for Washington State. CCPA is going into effect right now in California. There's nearly 80 other state laws that are being introduced across the country and in the state legislatures. So it's easy to see where we're very quickly developing a patchwork of laws at the state level that there's the potential of being in conflict with one another and creating more confusion for the consumer, as well as making it very difficult on the businesses. You could see where a business would say, well, we almost have to black out this state, which, the internet knows no boundaries. So the work that we're doing around privacy is very important. People often ask, well, it's 2020, big election year. It's going to be difficult to get things done. I certainly believe that, and yet I think there is an opportunity around privacy in particular. As CPA is going into effect, as more states are debating privacy at the state level, it's going to raise the awareness as to the importance of there being a national standard. And the work that we're doing on the Consumer Protection and Commerce Subcommittee that Jan Schierkowski has been leading, and I have been joining her. I'm proud that we have a staff draft that, at least some sections, that we released just before Christmas around privacy. We are continuing to work toward a bipartisan bill on privacy. And I know that other efforts have fallen apart this Congress, but it needs to happen. And the chair and both the chair of the subcommittee and the chairman of the full committee would like to move forward on a bipartisan privacy bill. The staff draft was focused on strict protections for consumers. It also included enforcement mechanisms with the FTC, but ensuring that the state AGs can also bring forward. They're going to play a very important role in privacy as we move forward. We're getting the feedback right now. We're going through the comments that we have received. And the goal is to have a strong bill, strong language at the national level that would be stronger than California and a model that people could support and say, you know what, this would be better and stronger and clearer at the national level and get that national standard in place. I do not support a private right of action and believe that the work that has been done to date in this bill, in the draft language around allowing making sure that there's strong roles for the state AGs and then increased enforcement at the FTC is the way to go. That's going to not have a negative impact on the small businesses and the innovators and the startups of the future. One of my biggest concerns with GDPR has been the increase in enforcement compliance costs that are impacting the startups in Europe right now. You see that there's a decrease in the number of startups, and America has led the world in innovations and new technologies. And we need to make sure as we move forward with privacy that we're doing it in a way that's going to ensure that next generation of startups and innovators here in America.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you raised to me at a central point, which I don't think has gotten enough attention, and that's just the compliance costs of this. A lot of the privacy advocates imply that there's really either that there are no costs or that the costs are meaningless because privacy is so important that we should pay, as Kennedy would say, pay any price, bear any burden. The Europeans certainly are paying a big price and bearing a big burden, as you noted. You know, there are websites you can't access in Europe now because American companies said it's too difficult for my company to do that.
And I've heard from some of the larger tech companies, well, you know, we'll take care of it. I want to make sure that we have that next generation of competitors to the large companies and the startups and the next generation of innovators.
Sure, absolutely. So ITIF wrote a report recently that did a very detailed cost analysis of what a sort of GDPR/California bill would cost versus a bill that's more still strong, but balanced and sort of somewhat restrained, but still providing strong protections. And the difference was stark. We estimated that a GDPR-style bill in the U.S. would have $120 billion a year compliance costs. That's a lot of money for a typical middle-class home, if you bear that, compared to a reasonable bill that would, again, still provide protections of $6 billion. So the delta is quite large. How do you see members on the committee thinking about that question? How do you make sure you get protection without, you know, making the cost so big that people suffer?
Right. Well, that cost is significant. And when it comes to small businesses, startups, any business, that's going to be a significant cost, and it's going to create another barrier. So I think the members of the committee are very sympathetic to that. I would also suggest that I'm not sure that CCPA is really creating the trust that we want with individuals. I'm sorry. The goal of privacy is to create trust with the consumers. Sound like I'm crying. But to create trust with the consumers so that we can move forward with more technology and more innovation.
Sure, absolutely. So we've got about 3 minutes left, and I just we could talk for hours, especially if you had water. But I want to just close on this question of AI. I had lunch last week, the honor of having lunch with the head of the Europe has created this high-level working group on AI, and the chair of it, a very interesting gentleman, a CEO from Finland. We were talking about what Europe is doing in this space, and you know, in general, Europe has this view, or I think many European policymakers have this view, that if they regulate AI very, very strongly, there you go. Oh, great. That if you regulate it very strongly, around things like you can only use data for what you say you're using it for and other things like that, that it will somehow convince people to use more AI, and it'll convince companies and consumers around the world to buy EU AI, not this cowboy capitalism American AI. But it clearly has some challenge. Well, how do you see that sort of the risk of us going down the EU path when it comes to AI?
Right. Well, it's been America that's been the innovator, right? This has been the land that we have led on the new technologies, and the regulatory approach doesn't result in more innovation. That's why America has always said a light touch. AI is, it has huge potential, and it's going to be revolutionary in so many different industries: precision agriculture, manufacturing, healthcare. There's just untold ways that AI is going to improve our lives and impact our lives. I applaud the way that the administration is leading to date, the principles that they have put forward. Again, we're very, I'm proud that America is leading on AI, and we need to make sure that we continue to lead. China is investing a lot. They're on our heels. But you look at the way China is using AI today. In some parts of China, there's one camera for every 6 citizens. They are tracking movements. They are using AI against the minorities and the dissidents in China. And but they're also selling, their equipment around the world. So we need to make sure that we are leading in AI and that we're doing it with a light regulatory touch that always honors America's values and principles around freedom and human rights and human dignity.
So yeah, I tell you, again, we hawking our reports. We wrote a report last year where we looked at about 15 or 20 quantitative indicators of AI progress, including venture funding, startups, scientists, publications. And we still do lead the Chinese in AI, but they lead Europe, and they're catching up quickly. But I think to sort of wrap this all up, I think the administration, Michael Kratsios's AI principles that the administration released, the privacy work you've been doing, these are all about getting the balance right, about moving forward with legitimate concerns, but doing it in a way that allows innovators and innovation to happen. So I hope that that process can continue and that we move forward with.
Well, I thought Kathy McMorris-Rogers did a great job. I have prepared remarks today, but also looking out over the crowd, I see everybody looking down at their devices, and it's hard to drum up any sympathy for Congress these days. But I hope you do appreciate that we're now 6 days into the impeachment trial, and when we're in trial, we can't use these things on the Senate floor. Does everybody appreciate that? There have been no convulsions that I know of. No senator has fallen out in the aisle and just gone into delirium tremens. So, give us a little love, because when that gavel comes in and the Chief Justice walks in, we have eschewed these for I guess now this will be the 7th day. So wish us well. The internet, I'm one of 6 keynote speakers. Oh, okay, wow. Look, the internet's strong. The internet's open. The internet's free to Americans. We need to keep it that way. I want to talk about 4 specific issues, and then I do have to run back and try to check into 2 committees so I can get my per diem in both those committees. Net neutrality. And really, Kathy did such a great job talking about all those. Accurate broadband maps, winning the race to 5G, and federal data privacy legislation, something I have spent a lot of time on. On net neutrality. Last year, I formed a bipartisan working group with Senator Sinema on the open internet. Our efforts have been focused on developing legislation that would create uniform rules of the road for all internet companies. The internet developed rapidly under the Clinton administration. When I was a freshman in Congress, we were learning how to use the World Wide Web. It developed rapidly, continued to revolutionize during the Bush administration. What was the key there? Both of those administrations, we used the light touch regulatory regime, paving the way for the world we are now entering. As we assess where we stand decades later, we should remember how we got to where we are today. As digital innovation continues to leap forward, the dynamic and creative nature of the internet should be encouraged, not discouraged, by over-regulation. So what happened in 2015? The FCC adopted rules that unfortunately increased costs for Americans and American businesses. And what happened? Investment in broadband actually decreased by $4 billion in the year after these rules went into effect. The rest of the economy was taken off. Investment in broadband decreased by $4 billion. Check us out on the facts there. In 2018, the new FCC reversed course, went back to the light touch rules of the Clinton and Bush administrations. And many were worried that these changes would hurt Americans' access to the internet. In fact, more Americans have been connected to fiber and investment has increased. Simply put, the parade of horribles predicted by advocates of Title II regulation simply have not occurred. That's why we need to continue rules to ensure that the internet remains powerful, a powerful economic engine, promotes future investment, and protects consumers by preventing blocking, throttling, and paid prioritization of lawful internet traffic. Through the Wicker Cinema working group process, it's become clear that there is more agreement on this issue than you might think. Most of us would agree that any legislative proposal should protect consumers, increase transparency, promote broader access to internet services, and ensure that content from different sources is treated fairly. I think we're making great progress there. Let's talk about accurate broadband maps. I think this is a situation where the Congress is moving, but also we've turned the FCC around on this issue. Accurate broadband maps, as Kathy McMorris Rogers just says, are a critical component to closing the digital divide and maintaining a prosperous internet economy. We need accurate broadband maps that tell us where the broadband is available and where it is not available at certain speeds. Flawed and inaccurate maps, which were just about to be foisted on us, would have wasted resources and stifled opportunities. So last year, I introduced the Broadband Data Act, which requires the FCC to change the way broadband data is collected, verified, and reported to the agency. As many of you know, this has passed the United States Senate. It awaits passage in the House, and I, for one, would sure like to get that bill on the president's desk early this year. Now, your previous panelists talked about winning the race to 5G, and we've got to do that. Healthcare providers in Mississippi have been innovative in reaching hard-to-reach patients and constituencies. University of Mississippi Medical Center can extend the reach of life-saving telemedicine and support more cutting-edge medical services. As a result, Mississippians and others around the country will enjoy increased access to better quality of care at lower cost and in remote locales if we can win the race to 5G. Our farms and ranches, 5G will enable the use of more precision agriculture technologies. The benefits of 5G will also extend to manufacturing, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and other next-generation innovation. For example, because 5G infrastructure will support significantly more data and near real-time connections, the manufacturing sector can increase efficiencies through automation in factories and supply chains. You know all of this, and you know that we need to win the race to 5G, and that question is up in the air. But achieving U.S. leadership in 5G will require a dedicated and coordinated effort at all levels of the government, and this starts with making more spectrum available. Again, I endorse the comments of my friend and colleague, Kathy McMorris Rogers. The challenge is this mid-band spectrum. My position is that Congress should speak on this issue, House and Senate, and the president should sign legislation into law. Barring that, I think we all know the FCC is preparing to act and is ready to act quickly. So if Congress would like to be heard, left, right, and center, Republican and Democrat, we need to act, and we need to act now because the FCC knows that speed is of the essence if we are to win the race to 5G. Also, I have legislation which I have given the shorthand of rip and replace, and that deals with another issue that your last panel talked about, and that is the Huawei and ZTE equipment in our networks. This underscores the importance of safeguarding our communications networks from threats to our national economic and personal security. We're not quite there on passing that legislation, as you might imagine. There are a number of views on that, but sure would be nice. And then my favorite issue for 2019 that I've spent so much sweat equity on, and that is federal data privacy legislation. Consumer trust is essential. To maintain trust, a strong, uniform federal data privacy framework should adequately protect consumer data from misuse. Here I am sticking to my script because I want to choose my words carefully. For the past year, I've been working with my colleagues on the Commerce Committee to develop a strong national and bipartisan privacy law that would provide meaningful data protections for all Americans. Late last year, Democrats on the Commerce Committee introduced legislation clearly reflecting where they want to go. This was a pretty good bill. However, any privacy bill will need bipartisan support to become law. From the beginning of this process, I have advocated for privacy legislation that would provide strong protections for consumers and create a uniform federal data privacy framework, a national uniform data privacy framework. Strong privacy protections need to apply to consumers regardless of where in the United States they live, work, or engage in commerce, both online and offline. A privacy bill will also need to be workable for businesses and foster an environment that continues to promote job creation, investment, and innovation. I also released a bill late last year that is intended to achieve those objectives. My draft bill is informed by over a year of bipartisan negotiations and feedback we have received from consumer advocates, state and local governments, academia, and a number of stakeholders representing many sectors of the economy. I am continuing to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to get a bill that will get us across the finish line. So those four issues are front and center in our committee and in my consciousness, and I think we are making great progress. In the meantime, the internet continues to be that great engine of job creation and economic growth. Maintaining a commitment to legislative ideas that promote investment, protect consumers, and foster innovation will help drive continued technology leadership and economic prosperity in the United States for years to come. Thank you, and have a good Super Bowl.
Good morning. It is great to be here at the State of the Net conference. Thank you, of course, to the Internet Foundation for having me here, and more importantly, for the good work you do to foster discussions just like this about internet policy. And I think this year's gathering is actually a special one because it marks the start of a new decade for all of us, and of course, for the internet too. So I want to propose that we use this opportunity to reaffirm something that is fundamental. And that is our commitment to a global and open internet for all. That might sound simple, but it's important. Because during the last decade, the global population with access to the internet doubled and now stands at 4 billion. It has empowered so many to share so much information that previously was held under lock and key. And we've witnessed brave and innovative souls from around the world use this technology to speak truth to power and give voice to their communities and dignity to one another. But we start this new decade with these rosy propositions challenged. We've learned that this formidable tool can not only bring us together, but it can divide us too. because we've discovered what is ugly, that outrage can travel online with a greater velocity than veracity. We've also discovered what is terrifying, that this tool for global collaboration can be used to disrupt democracies as surely as it can be used to destabilize dictatorships. These challenges are real. I think we need to address them not just here at home, but worldwide. But when we do, we need to ensure that the forces of reaction do not outpace our commitment to an open internet for all. And let me illustrate why by going beyond our borders. Because there's no better evidence of this problem than when governments respond to these challenges by turning the internet off and leaving their citizens in digital darkness. So that's what I want to talk about today, the growing number of internet shutdowns and what it means for us here in the United States. So to do this, imagine for a moment you're not in this conference facility, you're not in Washington, you are far away in the Kashmir Valley. So picture the uppermost corner of the Indian subcontinent. It's a place that is locked off from the world in so many ways. The southern side is bounded by one of the most striking mountain ranges in all of Asia. And the northern boundary is formed by the Great Himalayas. It's home to snowy mountains, picturesque rivers, and the holy shrine of the Amarath Temple. It's here that for roughly 6 months, India blocked internet service. This was the longest internet shutdown ever recorded in a democracy. So, just try to put yourself there if you can. Imagine you pick up your phone. The bars on the screen flicker and then disappear slowly, one by one. So you shut it off and restart it, because that's the universal way of trying to fix these things right out of the gate. And when that doesn't work, you start working your way down a list of nearby Wi-Fi routers, just hoping for a connection. Still, no luck. And at this point, you wonder, maybe there's a power outage. But you look around and the lights are still on, so that can't be right. Frustrated, you put down your device and you pick up something you haven't picked up in a long time, and that is a physical newspaper. And there you see it right on the front page. This was the experience of 7 million people in Kashmir Valley when they turned the internet off on August 5th of last year. And since then, that shutdown has sparked a wave of stories about what it means when connections are cut. They are tales of confusion and extraordinary accounts of economic and personal despair. Just take one, told by a journalist named Adil Akhzer, who writes for the Indian Express. Now, the office of the Indian Express is in Srinagar, a city of more than 1 million. It's just across the river from the Kashmir Valley's main maternity hospital. And that fact is important to Adil's story because it was in this hospital that his younger sister was scheduled to give birth. You see, Adil's sister was expecting her first child, and back in August, he wrote a column in the newspaper capturing the mood in his household and among his extended family. And it was the usual mix of emotions you'd expect: happy, scared, curious, all of them, of course, at the same time, but above all, they were excited. The house was already filled with the telltale signs of a new addition: tiny clothes, diapers, and more. They waited for the due date, August 26th, with bated breath. But by August 5th, the Kashmir Valley was cut off from the internet, and its residents were stuck navigating an information blackout. Their routines at home required epic adjustment because the region was thrust back into an earlier era. So Adil decided if he could not stay updated digitally, he would travel to the hospital nightly to check in on his sister. That meant working around curfews, barricaded roads, and security checkpoints. And it was on one of those visits on August 23rd, 3 days before he expected his family to gather in celebration, that he learned his sister's child had died. Now, even though Adil worked just across the river from the hospital, it still took 8 hours for the news to reach him. What happened is especially sad because it was avoidable. When the hospital staff discovered an irregularity with the baby's heartbeat, there was no way for them to alert the senior doctor because of the communications blackout. In fact, they tried to send for him in a car, but it was too late. The shutdown prevented real-time communication with medical professionals who could have saved a life. And that's a tragic tale, but it's just one story about one family. Remember, there are 7 million people who call Kashmir Valley their home. And since the shutdown started, unemployment is up, and industries in the region that depend on tourism are down. Healthcare and education are suffering. Vital supplies like insulin and baby food are running out. Cash is scarce because banks and automatic teller machines are shuttered. Still, the people of Kashmir have proved resilient. Every morning, like clockwork, hundreds of passengers have crammed into a train out of the valley for a 70-mile journey to the nearest town with a connection. They're packed so tightly they can barely move. And if all goes well, they return before nightfall. Kashmiris have dubbed this train the Internet Express. It carries people hoping to renew driver's licenses, apply for passports, fill out emission forms, and check email, and register for school exams. This is the only way they have to keep up with modern life. Now, in the age of an always-on internet, the idea of suddenly flicking connectivity off like a switch sounds dystopian. But for so many people in so many places, this is becoming reality. According to a report published by Top 10 VPN, 21 countries shut down the internet 122 times last year alone. That means there were more internet shutdowns in 2019 than ever before. In addition to India, shutdowns have taken place in Iraq, Sudan, Venezuela, Algeria, Indonesia, Chad, Sri Lanka, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, Mauritania, Pakistan, Egypt, Kazakhstan, Benin, Gabon, Eritrea, and Liberia. And just this month, press reports suggested outages in Iran during protests over the downing of a Ukrainian plane, on the heels of a blackout late last year that was in response to increases in the price of fuel. Now, the reason governments give for these blackouts are growing familiar. They seek to suppress protests, censor political rivals, prevent rumors from spreading, or activists from organizing. They are sometimes described, curiously, as a way to stop students from cheating on exams. They often take place just before and after important elections. There is little evidence that these bans work. In fact, recent history suggests that when states cut off internet access to prevent protest, just the opposite can occur. Moreover, researchers have found in many countries that electoral fraud and violence were higher during elections in which an internet shutdown took place. These bans are also costly. Top 10 VPN has tallied the global economic cost of these shutdowns at $8 billion and growing. In addition, these shutdowns threaten human rights. In 2016, the United Nations amended Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adding that promotion, protection, and enjoyment of human rights on the internet is part of the document. That same year, the world's highest human rights body, the United Nations Human Rights Council, unanimously condemned internet shutdowns. What they saw was that access to the internet is not only an issue of democracy and human rights, it's an essential tool for gathering and spreading information about human rights abuses. Despite these truths, internet shutdowns are being normalized in many parts of the world. That means too many people fighting uphill battles to be able to use technology to expand economic opportunity, express themselves, and organize without fear of reprisal. These shutdowns are not just the instruments of authoritarian regimes. They have been used by democracies trying to tackle problems too. This means freedom is being curtailed by the very tools that a decade ago we believed would liberate us. Now, if you are thinking, all of this does not concern you because this is all happening a world away, I understand. I get it. After all, the shutdown in the Kashmir Valley followed from the state invoking the Indian Telegraph Act of 1885, a law that dates to the British colonial era. Moreover, a few weeks ago, Indian courts ruled that an indefinite internet shutdown is an abuse of power, although that decision alone has not restored all service. So you might think this is at some distance from what could happen here in the United States. but you might want to think again. Here's why. Take a look at the Communications Act of 1934. Back in 1942, Congress made changes to this law, specifically to Section 606 of Title 47 of the United States Code, or as it's better known, Section 706 of the Communications Act. Section 706 allows the president to shut down or take control of any facility or station for wire communications if the president proclaims that there is a state or threat of war involving the United States. With respect to wireless communications, suspending service is permitted not only if the president proclaims a war or threat of war, but merely if there is a presidential proclamation of a state of public peril or simply a disaster or other national emergency. There is no requirement in the law for the president to provide any advance notice to Congress. So the language here is undeniably broad, and the power it describes is virtually unchecked. So maybe some context will help. The changes to this section of the law about wire communications were made within a month after the attack on Pearl Harbor. It was passed at a time when Congress was laser focused on developing new ways to protect our safety and security. And these are, of course, different days. Section 706 has not been directly applied to the internet. After all, back in 1942, wire communication meant telephone calls or telegrams. But remember, the bulk of our communications laws date to 1934. They remain the framework for communications infrastructure, and they still guide all of our policy and practice. In fact, if you think this is the kind of statutory language that has already been left to the dustbin of history, take note. In a 2010 report, the Senate concluded that Section 706 gives the president the authority to take over wire communications in the United States, and if the president so chooses, shut a network down. So it remains true that if a sitting president wants to shut down the internet or selectively cut off service, all it takes is an opinion from his attorney general that Section 706 gives him the authority to do so. That's alarming. Because if you believe there are unspoken norms that would prevent us from using Section 706 this way, let me submit to you that past practice may not be the most reliable guide for future behavior. Norms are being broken all the time in Washington, and relying on them to cabin in legal interpretation is not the best way to go. So I think we should be straightforward. We should acknowledge that internet shutdowns can stunt elections and the democratic process, threaten human rights, batter economies, and disrupt modern life. Then we should get to work. We can start in the United States by revisiting Section 706. The time has come for a modern assessment of this language, what it means, and what it should mean in the digital age. We can ask how this power squares with the Constitution and what role there should be for legislative and judicial branches. But we shouldn't stop there. The United States should develop a formal policy on government-directed internet shutdowns, informed by the experience of the State Department, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, and the Federal Communications Commission. Then we should share this expertise in global fora so we can work worldwide to reduce the number of these outages. Moreover, I think we need to have this discussion if we are committed to an open internet for all. Because without it, our laws could easily be contorted to support such outages. Because without it, we can expect the number of government-directed internet shutdowns to grow. And because without it, we could see what happened in Kashmir Valley happen in many more places in the world. Thank you.